Welcome to the webinar series Innovation for SDGs, Inspirational Tools Towards Sustainability Challenges, an event organized by the sectorial hubs of the University of Girona in collaboration with the Global University Network for Innovation, GUNI. The importance of organizing this event is due to the University of Girona commitment to take action in front of the emergency of directing researchers' interest towards solving SDGs challenges. For 2 weeks, different speakers will cover various topics all related to the SDGs and its achievement. The first part of the series begins with webinars related to sustainability and development, co-creation and RRI in innovation and research projects, and communication and advocacy for the Agenda 2030. Sessions covering more specific topics will follow next week, representing a vast array of disciplines and challenges. Each presentation will give ideas to promote knowledge transfer and to overcoming obstacles regarding the attainment of the SDGs. We want to thank you for attending this webinar, and we encourage you to participate in as many sessions as possible. Your knowledge and perspective are always very welcomed and wanted. But before we introduce the speakers of the day, let me share some housekeeping information for this session. A brief reminder about the session being recorded. Once the session is finalized, we will upload the video on the website, and it will be shared with those who could not attend the event. If you have any questions for the panelists, please write them in the Q&A section at any time during the session. You will find it here nearby the chat, and Q&A will take place at the end of the presentations. And last but not least, if you want to share the event via social media, please use the hashtag UDG for SDGs and GUNI SDGs. We will write them here down on the chat as well. And well, now that we know how to virtually engage, let's start with the session. Sylvia Simone, Director of the Church Scientific Culture and Digital Communication of University of Girona, will open the session. Sylvia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us today.
So, hello, good morning. Good morning to everybody, and very welcome to this series of webinars. So first of all, just to congratulate to the sectorial hubs and also to GUNI for the organization of these very interesting seminars, the ones for this week, but also the next, more concretely, that we will have next week. So thanks for giving me the opportunity just to explain our experience, or just to have this opening that I will explain a little about our experience in communicating, but more related to communicating research and science. So if you remember last Wednesday, there was a very nice webinar where where the experts were talking about aligning science and society. So it was a very, very interesting discussion about everything, opinions, explanations. But I remember one from Norbert Steinhaus from Germany that he just put a poll of how society is trusting with science. So from the last year, there was not many people trusting science or research or scientists or researchers, but it seems that from last April 2020, the trust was just increasing a lot. I think that a coronavirus pandemic was helping a lot to make people trusting with science. But during the same year, at the end of the year, this trust just decreased again. So now I would like to wonder what is going on this 2021. So what I can perceive from society with no numbers or was no pool is that there is like a big fluctuation about distrust. So we had, well, this week, for example, we had there was this issue related to AstraZeneca. So society is just saying, okay, this is good, this is not good. They are just giving opinions. But the main problem that I can find here is that there is a problem in the lacking of knowledge about the scientific methodology, how it works, research. How can we be sure about everything? So this is something that it's difficult, that we need to teach the people if we want the science to be aligned with society, or science be aligned with science be aligned with society, or society with science. So communication, I think it's the key word. We need to communicate, but we need to communicate in many aspects. So from the share of scientific culture and digital communication, we have been working just in this issue, in research communication. In research communication, and trying to find tools, different tools, just to communicate what our mates, what our researchers just are doing. But at that moment, there is a big issue about communication, research, and people think that there is only research in health, because health is what is wandering at the moment at society. But there are other researchers. There are climate change, but also research more related to basic. I'm talking about, for example, chemistry. I'm a chemist, and I'm making research in basic chemistry, in computational chemistry. I need to show the people how my research or other researchers that are not health research are important. So just let me give you an example. We are dealing a lot with quantum chemistry. So one of our goals is try to explain people these very abstract concepts. How can I explain what quantum is important for their daily life? Okay, it's very nice when I talk about a Schrödinger cat. Oh, it's very fancy, but I need people to understand why we need to make research in the field of quantum chemistry. So I need to explain something about quantum. But at the same time, I need to explain them something about quantum, because people need to know what is not quantum. So when they hear something about quantum medicine, they need to say, okay, this is just a fake news. So this is something that it's very important if we want to communicate research, but not health research, but all the research related to these 17 global goals that we need to afford. At the same time, I'm the director of the Cátedra of Scientific Culture and Digital Communication, but I am in charge of the research communication at the University of Girona. So when we are talking about communicating at the university, long time ago, it was mainly related to the fact that it was the relationship between the research, not the researchers, or some research and the media, but only this small relation. Nowadays, we know that it's very important not to make research, but to communicate it, because if we don't communicate our research to the society, for the society, we do not exist. So this is a problem. So from the University of Girona, from the area of communication, we try to design tools just to give the opportunity or the facilities to the researchers to perform this communication directly to society, just organizing fairs, for example, or to higher school students, just organizing webinars. So again, communication is really very important. If you don't communicate, you don't exist in some way. So this is what I wanted just to show you, that communication and advocacy is just the keyword. If we want to align society and science, and if we want to innovate for the SDGs, that is at least it's what it's called in our 2030 agenda. So I would just want to thank again to the organization just to give me the opportunity to spend, I don't know, 5-10 minutes talking about communication, about the importance of communication. And for sure, I would like you to have the opportunity to enjoy these very nice talks that Eric and Rachel will give us in a while. So thank you very much for attending to this session.
Thank you, Sylvia, for opening the webinar. Well, the title of the webinar of today is Communication and Advocacy for the Agenda 2030. And we will have the presentations of Eric Mulholland and Rachel Soper. They will highlight emerging opportunities as well as unveil challenges to reflect upon and pave the way for future and innovative projects. At the end of the session, we are pleased to welcome Professor Daniela Tilbury, and she will give a short speech at the end, linking the 3 sessions of the webinar series that we have already celebrated. The first one about sustainability and education for sustainable development and research on day 1. And the second one was last Wednesday, I think, about RRI co-creation and participation of citizens in science. And today, communication for the SDGs and research. And now I will start with the first speaker, Eric Mulholland. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today. Eric works at the Institute for Managing Sustainability at Europe's largest business school in Vienna, and his main focus is working for the European Sustainable Development Network, Esdn. It is an informal network for public administrators and experts in sustainable development. And Eric organizes opportunities for exchange and mutual learning through the Esdn conferences, workshops, and peer learning platforms. Thank you again, Eric, for joining us today. Please, the floor is yours. And participants, you can, as we already said before, you can write down your questions on the Q&A section, and we will debate them later on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Marta, for the introduction. I'm Eric Mulholland, and I work for the European Sustainable Development Network, ESDN for short. And I would like to very much to share with all of you what the ESDN is and how we use communication and communication about the 2030 agenda and the SDGs in our work. So what is the European Sustainable Development Network? As Marta already gave in a brief introduction, we're an informal network of public administrators and experts dealing with sustainable development. So we work with national level ministries who are dealing with sustainable development, as well as scientists, researchers, business, NGOs, CSOs. So anybody in Europe who deals with sustainable development is welcome in our network, and we deal with them trying to find solutions in how to implement the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. We've been a network since 2002, so we've been working with sustainable development for a very, very long time. We have over 100 associate members and over 400 partners from over 30 countries. Most of them are from Europe, but we also have a global perspective. So we have members from the United States and from Egypt, from Turkey, from Taiwan. Yeah, so very, very broad members from regarding sustainable development. And we act as a sustainable development knowledge hub for Europe. So collecting information on national sustainable development strategies for the national governments within Europe. And what we tend to focus on a lot in the ESDN through conferences and workshops and peer learning platforms is this policy learning and exchange. So learning from other countries or the subnational level about how they're implementing the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. So that's what we do. And how we facilitate the communication of the SDGs is engaging, exchanging and learning about SDG implementation, as I already mentioned, from holding conferences, if there's specific topics in sustainable development and in the implementation of the SDGs that are really relevant, such as budgeting for the SDGs or sustainable finance or communication, we tend to talk about those issues within the ESDN and see what's going on at the European level, so that countries don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, and that they can really learn from one another. One of the main ways that we communicate this information is in ESDN reports on these issues. However, since our main base and our main member base is our policymakers, sometimes they don't really necessarily have the time to read really long reports that are sometimes 25 pages, 30, sometimes even 50 pages long. So one of the policy communication tools that we use are ESDN policy briefs, where if we have a workshop on sustainable finance, then we synthesize all the learnings that we take from these events and formulate them into a very short policy document with recommendations on how policymakers can take these learnings and potentially implement them or share them across their ministries. We also do newsletters, which I think a lot of organizations do to communicate what's happening. We do that not only for the ESDN, but also for all governments within Europe, that if they have any new developments, that they can share those with us, and then we distribute them to our member base. And another thing that the ESDN does for advocacy is we also host the European Sustainable Development Week, which is a platform that offers all European countries, anybody who wants to organize an event that has to do with sustainable development, and in particular the SDGs, that we offer them a platform to showcase their event. And we've had, I think, over 29,000 or 28,000 events that have been registered through the ESDN since 2015. And in just the last 3 years, we've reached almost 20 million people who have taken part in this. So having a platform to communicate the SDGs is really, really important. And it's something that the ESDN has done since 2015. Now, we're really good in the ESDN in communicating with policymakers. However, we realize that, as often is the case in sustainable development, that we are a very small crowd of people. And it's all well and good to communicate amongst ourselves, but how are we, as these experts in sustainable development, communicating to people who might not be experts or dealing with these themes all the time? And so we decided in 2018 to host a workshop on communicating the SDGs, where we invited participants, so 70 participants, which were made up of policymakers, NGOs. We had people from media, so a magazine, and journalists, academia, and then sustainable development experts who attended this workshop, and from 17 countries. So it was really, really broad participation. And how the workshop was conducted was that we had a mix of good practice communication examples, so from countries, from media, from the journalists, and also we couple that with group discussions. So you can talk about the case examples and why they're effective, and potentially what communication for the Sustainable Development Goals actually needs, and how we can achieve that in our daily lives and in our communication. And I would just like to read a quote from our president who attended this workshop. and she basically summarized the dilemma that we have in sustainable development and communication is that what sustainability, sustainable development, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs need is to have narratives and stories to communicate these complex concepts by finding and striking a balance between being overly complex and too simplistic and reductionist. So I think we often have this problem that sustainable development is extremely complex. And because of that complexity, it's very difficult to communicate that to people who are not in the sustainable development community. Arguably, it's even difficult to communicate sustainable development to people in the sustainable development community because there are so many definitions around sustainable development and what it means. And also, we run the danger that if we try and simplify it too much, that we really miss the core of what sustainable development actually is. And so at the beginning of this workshop, we invited a communication expert, so from the academia side of things and research. And one of the first things that she shared with us is that there is a really big lag between research and policy making, and this is both in a time lag in the sense that when policymakers need information to make good policies, to make effective policies, they tend to need information yesterday, maybe even today. And that's very difficult for researchers to do because you need to compile all the data, you need to analyze the data, you need to draw conclusions, and that takes a lot of time. And so the time scales just do not line up very nicely between research and policymaking. And when we in the sustainable development community want to have evidence-based policy learning, that's very, very difficult. And also another side note to that is that research often tends to work in a different currency. They don't necessarily make their research to help policymakers. They do it to maybe get published in prestigious journals. And those even take a lot of time to have your work published, and those it can take months or even years to have your work thoroughly looked for. So again, it's really this lag between the timescales of policymaking and research, and being able to communicate the results of that research. And that's no different, I think, in the sustainable development community. However, this researcher was able to help us in identifying the challenges that we face in communication, and especially communication for sustainable development. And the first thing is that sustainable development is inherently complex. There are so many themes and topics that we have to deal with: climate change, biodiversity loss, CO2 emissions. Yeah, the list goes on. And that's also compounded by the high degree of uncertainty in sustainable development. This is not necessarily a new topic that we've been dealing with in the sustainable development community. It's been around since the late 80s, but the solutions that sustainable development proposes haven't necessarily been done yet. So it's uncertain, and it's hard for scientists or even policymakers, and this is the political aspect of it, to be able to reassure that these solutions will actually be solutions in the future. And so if they haven't been proven before, it's difficult to kind of sell that to people. And also it sometimes doesn't necessarily work out between the political cycles and sustainable development, because political cycles, in Europe and in most of the world, run on only a few years, 4 to 5 year political cycles, and sustainable development is much longer than that. So again, it's this time discrepancy between the two things that makes it very, very challenging. And the SDGs themselves are extremely complex. There's 17 goals, and many of the SDGs have interdependencies on one another, but at the same time, they also have a lot of trade-offs that are happening. We have SDG 8 with the economic growth, and also at the same time, climate action and in climate protection, and then sometimes those are in opposition to one another. So trying to balance those also adds a lot of degrees of complexity to the sustainable development debate and the SDG debate. And as I've kind of already alluded to, the implementation of sustainable development solutions is also extremely difficult. There are so many stakeholders that need to be taken into account, not just within the government, there are multiple levels of government. You have the national level. Within Europe, you have the European Union, and then you have the regional level and the local level. But then you also have, the business side. You have your NGOs, you have your civil society, and how do you communicate these solutions to all of those different bodies and bring them on board in the sustainable development discussion? And lastly, the enormity of necessary efforts of sustainable development lead to frustration and hopelessness. I think we hear in the news all the time, how many billions, trillions of dollars or euro it would take to make the necessary changes, and what would then need to be done, whether that's, we have to rethink our habits of consumption and production. It is overwhelming for many people and leads to frustration. Oh, me as a single person, I can't do anything about it, so why should I try? Yes, those were some of the challenges that she mentioned from the researching perspective on communication that sustainable development faces. And then she also went on to say that sustainable development communication is based on the deficit model, which is, we think as sustainable development practitioners, that the more information the public has, the right facts, the better decisions they can make regarding sustainable development. However, this isn't necessarily true that more information leads to better decisions, as we see in society. Even if we're communicating a lot, saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that to reduce your carbon footprint, for example, is that there is a disconnect between knowing what actions one could take to reduce carbon footprints and actually taking those actions. And it's also the case that the way that we as sustainable development practitioners communicate is fairly elitist and transmissive. So it's me as an expert in sustainable development communicating to many people about desired changes or actions, and it's me sharing my knowledge with you. And that's not necessarily the best to affect the changes that we're advocating for. And oftentimes the sustainable development debate and the issues that we talk about a lot, they just lack relevance to everyday life for people. So they miss this connection to their daily life, that, oh, if I make this little change, I could make this little change, and I could implement that in my life. And that's missing a lot in the way that we communicate. Yes, and then the more information, this kind of goes to the deficit model, is that even if we do have the right facts, the more information that we put on people, the more tired they get of it. It's just too much to process, all the different themes that are a part of sustainable development. And then, as I've kind of already alluded to, it's just this knowledge action disconnect that is then problematic. Is that I know that, for example, if I want to reduce my carbon footprint, I shouldn't fly as much as I do, for instance. And I still don't necessarily follow through on that, even though I know I should not do that, or I should eat less meat to reduce my carbon footprint. Is that there isn't this follow through on these actions, even though there might actually be knowledge there. So yeah, that was the research perspective. And then we had a journalist who was also at this workshop, and she basically told us how one could tell a compelling story, because telling compelling stories tries and gets everybody on board and gets them involved and invested in the message that you're trying to deliver. And so we wanted to try and see how that could then be used with sustainable development. And so she had a list of 6 super ingredients for telling a compelling story. I'll only go into a few of them. The first one being expert knowledge, which from that perspective of a journalist, they're generalist in nature in the topics that they cover. And so they might not necessarily have all the facts on climate change or biodiversity loss. And so they would need expert knowledge to give credence to the stories that they're trying to tell, or the articles that they're trying to publish. And I think that's also probably something that everybody could use in the way that they communicate, is that having expert knowledge helps align better what you want to say in the messages that you want to get across. The next ingredient was reaching your target group, and not only reaching them, but probably also knowing who your target audience is, because depending on who your target audience is, you're going to potentially have to remake your story or tweak it in certain ways so that the group that you're trying to talk to or share information with gets that information the way that is the most helpful to them so that they have the best chances of engaging with it. Having a good topic is also very, very important for telling a compelling story. If you can find a really, really good topic, then the story kind of tells itself and people are more likely to be interested in it. Professional storytelling, I don't think we necessarily need to get into that one because I don't think not everybody can be professional storytellers. But the fifth point and the fifth ingredient that's really helpful is being constructive. And I'll get to that a little bit later. And then the sixth one is be authentic. So going to reaching your target group and knowing who your target audience is one of the main messages that we learned from this speaker was that we should avoid framing sustainable development topics in a negative way. I think in the sustainable development community and in the news that we hear is that it's all doom and gloom. You know, the polar bears are dying and we don't want the polar bears to die. But the emotions that are elicited from these kind of negative framings of the sustainable development debates can actually lead your audience to feel horror, powerlessness, hopelessness, and guilt about the topic. Oh, is it my fault that the polar bears are dying? Why? I don't want them to die or their ice to melt. So that's a problem in the way that we communicate sustainable development because why is that a problem? Guilt feels bad to people. It means that they have to look inside themselves, potentially change their habits, mentalities, and sometimes those are actually in direct conflict with the feelings of guilt. So, you know, we like going to somewhere warm when it's cold in our home countries, or we like eating meat because it tastes good. So these are all kind of justifications that we have, and we end up kind of ignoring these feelings of guilt that, oh, I'm just an individual. I can't possibly be the one that's affecting the ice sheets in the Arctic. And then another thing that she highlighted was that people also tend to believe things that fit into their core system of beliefs, which, you know, habits are then not questioned and lifestyles aren't changed. However, there are countermeasures that we can take when trying to communicate these stories that we want to tell. And so understanding your target's core beliefs makes it a lot easier to reach them. And you can kind of shift their respective conclusions away from, you know, bad habits and towards better actions for their own benefit. Yeah, the example that I have below is in trying to relate that to people's daily lives. So such as, oh, maybe we shouldn't be using plastic bags so often because they find their way into their oceans and then return in the food that we eat when we consume fish and all the microparticles, for instance. So really anchoring the desired changes that we want to see in broader society is almost necessary, that we can connect it to everybody's daily lives. Yeah. Having a good topic, that is also important. So topics of public interest, so the more current the topic, the more people connect with it. So I think we can say COVID-19 is a really, really current topic, and how maybe, you know, the world wasn't prepared for it, and now maybe this would be a good opportunity to say sustainable development could have an answer to that and to be more resilient for future pandemics, something like that. So it's really using the current topics that are out there to connect it with people and their consciousness so that they can make those connections. And great stories often have a hero or a heroine with a problem that is interesting also for themselves or that many people have. And so trying to frame the sustainable development narrative around, you know, not necessarily a superhero, it can be a superhero, but around a problem that everybody has, and then telling that story in a simple way that's engaging and is recognizable to people. That's very important. These stories can then, you know, connect them. It can kind of show them a way to deal with whatever problem that they're facing. And so this comes into effect this constructive nature, that the sustainable development should be constructive. So it's fine to highlight a problem, such as climate change, and but just saying that it's a problem and not offering any viable solutions is problematic. And so it's a reasons to stand that it's fine to address these problems, but with viable solutions. So how can people improve themselves, what they're doing to do this? And that's really important when it comes to communication and having these kind of positive, constructive narratives that happen instead of these negative, oh, the polar bears are dying out and their ice is melting and the sea levels are rising. And I'd like to actually now share a few good practice case examples that we were able to gather at this workshop regarding communication. And one of those is Finland, and they basically have this platform, this test that anybody can take. I think it's more based on the Finnish averages of like CO2 emissions, but the test is in English as well as in Finnish, and you can take the test. I kind of have a picture of it up here, and it's called the Sustainable Lifestyles Commitment Service. And what the Prime Minister's office wanted to do with this is to kind of raise awareness of people on the topic of reducing CO2 emissions. So the language that the test uses is accessible and understandable to a large majority of people. I think everybody knows what carbon emissions are. And the test allows people to see how their individual daily actions, so things that they're doing in their daily lives, impact their CO2 emissions. So it's really drawing this direct link between the daily activities and the impacts that they have on CO2. And if you can then recognize those in your daily life, then you can then take changes to then maybe have a different impact on CO2 emissions. So it really anchors and connects actions that reduce carbon footprints to daily life, and they offer constructive advice on how to further reduce carbon footprint instead of leaving them with an abstract number. I think I can even name an example that here in Austria, where I'm based, every time I try and plan out a route on my computer of where I want to go from point A to point B, it will give me a little number with a green leaf next to it that says I've saved 2.2 kilograms worth of carbon, which is great, but that's an abstract number to me. I don't know if that's really, really good or if that's really, really bad, and how much of a difference that makes in the grand scheme of things. So it's a nice piece of information to have, but without a lot of context. And so this test kind of provides that context and offers constructive advice. And I would recommend everybody giving it a try. It's a pretty fun test and only takes 10 to 20 minutes to fill out. And then I would also like to share another example from France, and it's the Energy Observer project, which is a boat that is self-sufficient in energy. So it's hydrogen and solar power fueled. So it has zero emissions, zero fine particles, zero noise. And basically it's been going around the world for the last, I would like to say 4 or 5 years, basically showcasing that there are other ways of transportation that don't rely on fossil fuels. And it's gained so much media attention and deals with the SDGs that the crew of this boat has even done crew logs that they then upload onto the internet. They've done documentaries. They've even done documentaries that focused on the SDGs, and they've gained a lot of media attention in many countries that they visited. Yeah, so that's just another example of a really, really interesting project. It's probably out of a lot of budgets, but still really interesting in how communication has been used to really highlight innovative approaches to communicating the Sustainable Development Goals. And the next case example is Project 17, which is a German magazine, actually, and the 17 Goals magazine. Basically, they wanted to tell positive, inspiring stories of change and show how we can all contribute to the success of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Stories and articles feature people and organizations, foundations, companies, science, and politics, and show how everybody can contribute to the goals. The stories are even marked with the SDGs that they address. So it really kind of highlights if you're interested in only a few SDGs, then you can really target the articles that you read. Yes, in the diversity of the stories that they offer have the potential to spark interest and foster emotional connections to the SDGs. And I think emotions play a really, really big part of communication, and especially communication of sustainable development, trying to stay away from those feelings of guilt and hopelessness and, oh, I can't do anything, to really positive stories of people actually doing something that can be simple to do in your everyday life that is positive, and that people can then feel inspired to make those changes themselves. And then another good case example was from Iceland and their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which they basically launched a media campaign to reach citizens about the SDGs. And the way that they did this is that they basically, you're transported, and I will play the video clip after this, to 2030, and basically how the world is in 2030. So it's a kind of a make-believe news broadcast, but what they ended up doing was they ended up airing this in print media, as well as in movie theaters. And they had 3 different videos, and they aired them 9 different times. And they did surveys afterwards, and they found that the videos were actually seen by 80% of viewers. And so 85% saw at least one of the videos. And then that wasn't enough for them. And so they wanted to know, okay, that's all well and good, but our main point was to see if people know more about the SDGs now. After these videos had done, and the surveys that they ended up conducting, people did actually end up knowing more. So it's positively correlated that people then knew more about the SDGs after these videos were aired in the movie theaters and in print media. So now I'm going to try and share this 1-minute video. It will be in Icelandic, but I will make the subtitles come on. 1 second. Okay.
Gott kvöld. Þróunarsamvinna heyrir brátt sögunni til. Þörfin orðin hverfandi, segir utanríkisráðherra. Ótrúlega framfarir hafa orðið í Afríku á einum áratug. Hafið ekki hreinna síðan fyrir togaröld. Sjávarútvegsráðherra segir ástand sjávar og fiskistofna aldrei verið betra. Vopnaframleiðendur berjast í bökkum eftir að verulega hefur dregið úr hernaðarútgjöldum á heimsvísu. Utanríkisráðherra segir útlit fyrir áframhaldandi stöðugleika. Og síðasti sígarettupakkin hefur verið seldur á Íslandi. Eftirspurn svarar ekki lengur kostnaði við innflutning. Guðfinnur Jónsson, síðasti reykingamæðurinn, segist ekki ætla að gefast upp og flytur til Frakklands. Þetta var bara orðið svo einmannalegt. Þetta voru góðar fréttir úr framtíðinni á nokkrum af 17 heimsmarkmiðum Sameinuðu þjóðanna sjálfbæra þróun.
Yeah, so they ended up using a little bit of humor to get their point across. No one's going to be smoking anymore in 2030, and the weapons maker are also going out of business. So it kind of puts this in a really positive, almost fun light about, and encourages people to think about the future and what it could be like, because planning for the future is more positive and yeah, just a different way of dealing with the SDGs, and kind of ingraining this sense of, yes, sustainable development is very long-term in its scope. Good. And then at the end of this workshop, we ended up taking a lot of recommendations for how we can communicate better. And so this was done in the discussion groups within the workshop between policymakers and the people in the media and business and CSOs and NGOs. So in order to communicate better, it's worth investing in knowing who the target audience is and discovering and attuning to their needs, which takes time and resources, but at the end of the day is worth the efforts when you can better reach your audience and get them to kind of do the actions that you want from them and not just ignore them. So it's not just about giving the knowledge, but also hopefully that they have the accompanying actions that we want to see. Also define appropriate communication methods and strategies and channels to best reach your target audience. So I have to deal with this in my daily work with policymakers, that maybe a report that is 50 pages long isn't the best method to communicate on a potential topic, but a policy brief on that topic that's only maybe 5 pages and very concrete and easy to read and easily digested is a better method of communicating. So that is also worth considering when communicating, especially about sustainable development. And again, really focusing on this, finding and sharing positive examples of people doing something that supports your communication objective, to show others that it can be done, and really to go away from these senses of negative feelings that sustainable development can sometimes provoke in people. Yeah, so no feelings of guilt. Don't confront people with seemingly insurmountable issues, as this can cause apathy and overall inaction, which is not what we want, because we want to motivate people to take actions for sustainable development and to become more actively involved in it. Having knowledge about the topic you wish to communicate is also very, very important. Being constructive, so not just saying that this is an important topic, but also giving solutions to these issues that people can then take and implement in their own lives. And then probably one of the most important parts of communication is that you need to allocate resources for better communication, whether that's time or with people, expertise or training. That's all very, very important, in that all costs money at the end of the day, which can sometimes be a hindrance or difficult, but it's one of the realities that we have to work with when we want to better communicate, especially about the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, that more or less concludes my presentation on communicating the Sustainable Development Goals and the experiences of the European Sustainable Development Network. If you want to have any further information or are curious about the European Sustainable Development Network, please visit our website. If you would like to read more about the communication workshop that we have, I have some links here. Also a report that we wrote, and then the policy brief too that is about communication. So yes, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions that we can't answer here, you're free to write an email to office@esdn.eu. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Eric, for your presentation and your ideas. I really enjoyed the practice cases. Yeah, I'm sure that it will be helpful for all the participants today. We've had a few questions coming in the Q&A section.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. I'll start with a short one.
Sure.
Yes. Well, one of the participants liked the recipe you gave for telling compelling stories regarding being constructive and authentic. No? How can we do this? If you can give any tip.
Yeah, so being constructive, what I kind of mention is that having practical solutions to the challenges that we face in sustainable development that are not so difficult to achieve. So really these small changes that people can make are really, really helpful in kind of setting them on the way towards sustainable development. So that could be, we can take eating meat, for example, that if you eat meat every day, that one small change could be maybe eating less meat or only eating it on a few times a week, and setting that goal for yourself. It could be something that's small change, but if multiple people do that, then it can have really, really huge changes on the aggregated scale. And being authentic, I think it's important not to kind of delude people or trick them into doing things, because it especially with sustainable development, because eventually it will come out that it's either not working or it's, I don't know, maybe some wrong information. And yeah, no one likes to be tricked into doing something, especially if they then find that out later. So being honest about, you know, the challenges that sustainable development represents, but as well as the potential gains that you can then get from it if you're able to implement these changes. Yeah, I hope that helps and answers the question.
Thank you. Here another message. Thanks for the interesting presentation and the many practical tips. Interesting the recommendations to communicating positive and searching links to everyday problems. Are these tips perhaps more oriented to society in general? Could you please share with us as well some specific ideas to overcome the lag between policymakers and academia?
So, yes, maybe I'll start with the academia and the policymakers, because I work in both of those worlds. So I work at a university, so I do research, and I also work with policymakers because the Esdn is a policymaking network. To overcome the lag, I think would be to maybe even have informal discussions with policymakers and between researchers on potential sustainable development topics. So not really relying on formalized research maybe, and being able to have, stakeholder mechanisms in place that allow this exchange of ideas between different stakeholder groups. So I think Finland even has this, this stakeholder platform where they're able to exchange different views with society, with youth, with people in their ministries, and with business, that they can really have these kind of informal talks to exchange information. And that's really where the learning can take place in a non-formalized setting. The ESDN does this to a certain extent too, and that you can, as a researcher, kind of bring in your ideas and share them with policymakers and say that this is an important topic, or have you considered thinking about this aspect, because policymakers are not, they're generalists when it comes to sustainable development. They're not necessarily experts. And so they would, I think, very much welcome this exchange in the viewpoints from research that doesn't necessarily need to have this really huge time lag that we typically see between results and yeah, it being taken up by policymakers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric. We have a few more questions, but we will leave them for the debate after Rachel's presentation. I will thank you again, Eric, and I will present first Rachel Soper, and then she will start her presentation. Rachel, hello.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. Well, Rachel Soper is acting senior project manager for education at the Students Organizing for Sustainability in the UK. It is an international charity created by students and staff at the National Union of Students in the United Kingdom in response to the climate emergency and ecological crisis. And Rachel works on education work, programs and campaigns. And she also works across the student movement and with partner organizations in the wider community. Yeah, Rachel, if you can start, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Eric. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I've had there's definitely some links of what I'm going to talk about soon. So it's great to see we're on the same page. So is my screen showing okay? Yeah, great.
Yes,
so,
yes, perfect.
Thank you, Marta, for the introduction. As I said, I'm Rachel Soper from Students Organising Sustainability, and my focus today is going to be on communicating and advocating for the SDGs through education, so through student learning and through student experience. So what I'm going to cover today is the student demand for sustainability, our engagement with the SDGs, case studies from our work, and students as agents for change. So first of all, an introduction for Sos Uk, building on Marta's introduction. We're a charity launched in 2019. We're part of the National Union of Students in the UK family, which represents 7 million UK students. We engage, inspire and empower students to lead on sustainability as a long-term investment in education today for a better future tomorrow. So our mission, our work focuses on getting more students leading on and learning about sustainability, to embed sustainability in formal education from early years to adult learning across all disciplines, and to make sustainability more inclusive so it's for everyone. We're also founding members of SOS International, which is a network of like-minded organizations contributing to data and research on sustainability, as well as delivering campaigns, programs, and adding capacity to each other. So some of you may be familiar with SOS International as well. So before we can talk about communication and advocacy for sustainability and the SDGs, it's important to reflect on what our students and staff are thinking and feeling. So SOS UK has a big focus on research and insight to inform our work, and here's some of our research. So since 2014, we've been asking students from across the tertiary education sector how concerned they are about climate change. And March 2019 saw this concern rise all the way up to 91% of UK students, which reflects a trend very similar to that of the UK public. So the red squares on the graph are data from the general UK population, and the blue line is our student research. So we can see that students are consistently more concerned than the general public, and that concern is incredibly high at the moment, at 91%. We also have research evidencing significant student demand for sustainability within their education. So as well as 91% of students agreeing that their place of study should promote sustainable development, we also know that 83% want to see sustainable development actively incorporated in all courses, and 65% want to learn more about it. So students feel ill-equipped currently to address the challenges of our time. And these results are statistically significant across disciplines. And so it's not just geography students or other subjects typically associated with sustainable development. And responses indicate a strong preference for education for sustainability being made relevant to the student's future career and academic discipline. So they want to learn for their career aspirations and relevance to their future careers, but also to make a difference to our collective future. And there's lots of ways that students want to learn for sustainability. Students have highlighted that the most relevant ways are through applied learning opportunities, such as placements. But students also want to see it built into existing course content, making it relevant to their chosen area of study. And we know that staff perspectives are also mirroring this, with 93% of staff within UK universities agreeing that it is important for students to leave their time in formal education with the knowledge and skills required to address environmental and sustainability and social responsibility challenges. So we've got this really clear picture of students and staff both wanting this as part of the education system. And thinking specifically about student opinion on the SDGs and Agenda 2030, we have these findings. And again, this is data from the UK. So between January 2018 and February 2019, awareness of the SDGs significantly increased from 28% to 34%, but 61% had still not heard of them. And when asked about who should lead and support the achievement of the SDGs, the government is seen as playing a really strong role, with 81% agreeing. 73% see a strong role for universities, and 64% think individuals should be actively playing a role in the achievement of the SDGs. On top of that, 70% of respondents said they wanted to learn more about the SDGs, 57% wanted to be more involved in action that helps achieve the SDGs. And lastly, when asked what goal they thought was the most important, obviously we understand that there's lots of connectivity and interdisciplinary connectivity between the goals, but climate action and no poverty are seen as the most important when taking the goals individually, with quality education and clean water and sanitation the third most popular in 2018 and 2019 respectively. So this research and all these findings have led us to engage with the SDGs, and the breadth and interconnectivity of sustainability is really well captured by the SDGs, which is why we proactively engage with them as a framework. And although there is some critique of the SDGs, we see them as a useful tool for engagement with sustainability, and it can be useful to use that critique in learning spaces as an opportunity to explore alternative systems and ways of doing things through constructive discussions and activities. So some of our work that we engage with in the SDGs, one is the Global Goals Teach-In, something that has just wrapped up for 2021. It's our annual 2-week campaign to encourage educators to incorporate the SDGs into their teaching and learning. So the aim of the teach-in is quite often to get educators who have never thought about including the SDGs within their learning spaces to bring them in. And it raises awareness of the importance of sustainable development, raises awareness of the SDGs, and it catalyzes curriculum reform to test new ideas, to embed sustainability and social responsibility across all learning, to link teaching, learning and assessment to local and global concerns, and to prepare students with those knowledge, skills and attributes to tackle the world's greatest challenges. And this year's campaign was the biggest reach ever. We had 496 educators pledging to incorporate the global goals into their teaching and learning. And through this, that reached 47,000 students through lessons, workshops and tutorials. And that was across 48 educational institutions, which included schools, colleges, universities, as well as students' unions and alternative training providers. So it was a huge reach this year. And the reason why people take part, we asked educators why they were taking part in the teaching. And these quotes summarize why they chose to take part. So we've got things on here like the importance of students as future leaders, that they want as through their role as educators, equipping students with the skills they need to be future leaders. And that goals lead to positive change when applied to both our personalized and to business models from a marketing lecturer. And the belief that the goals should be part of all teaching, that they're essential. And we have to be doing this across all learning, as well as the importance of informing and enabling the next generation of professionals to begin their career with a focus on the climate crisis and the SDGs. There's lots of different reasons why people are taking part. And on the next slide, I've got a word cloud that shows the kind of courses that were part of the teaching this year, with the bigger words being more common. So the things that really stuck out for me on this were management, engineers, business, international, art, design. So the engagement from such a diverse range of courses and modules demonstrates widespread support across the sector for education for the SDGs, and shows the importance of interdisciplinary action to achieve the goals. And we had courses including animation, blockchain technology, constitutional law, data signals, education psychology, fashion marketing, genetics, human rights, this really broad range of subjects, all incorporating the SDGs and communicating those with students and encouraging them to learn about them. We also offer curriculum mapping. So through a student-led audit, we map the inclusion of the global goals across all modules or courses within the university, college or faculty. So exercises like this are key to communication advocacy, because without a good data on what we're already doing across an institution like a university, we cannot effectively advocate for change. So mapping the goals like in this way can lead to institution-wide engagement with the SDGs, identifying unknown pockets of good practice and allies across an organization. It helps students to develop skills in leadership, increase buy-in from faculties and increase support for academics. So, and this is a really useful tool for creating the SDGs across an institution. So I've got a few case studies. The case studies that follows look to share a range of examples of how the SDGs are being embedded in the curriculum from a range of disciplines at different institutions, and also the SDGs for which they support. So the SDGs at the bottom of each screen will be shown are the ones that are being promoted through these case studies. And the key with all these case studies is ensuring that the issues are being incorporated into the curriculum in relevant and meaningful ways for the students. So first up is the University of Bristol Medical School. So there's an elective placement for Year 2 medicine students within doctor surgeries and hospital wards. And the UK National Health Service contributes 4 to 5% of the country's carbon footprint and around 1% of the UK's waste. So it's a contributor towards our emissions and our waste in the UK. And the placement provides opportunity for students to learn about their role as future healthcare professionals within a sustainable healthcare system. And through the placement, students are trained and supported to design and implement an impactful project or initiative which improves both sustainability and patient care. The projects have included deprescription, social prescription, green space projects, travel schemes, and promoting alternative pharmaceuticals with lower environmental impact. And this example builds in that applied learning that we spoke about earlier, as well as clearly linking to students' future careers as doctors, and communicating the links and co-benefits between the goals, such as health and climate action, that usually these can come together really well in a healthcare setting. So we deliver this module with Sos UK and the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare in the UK to these students. Next up is something that has also concluded quite recently, the Shape Sustainability Impact Project. It's another example of applied learning, highlighting the importance of interdisciplinary learning and collaborative action. So we targeted students from the arts, humanities, and social sciences, as their valuable contribution to sustainable development is often overlooked when compared to students from STEM backgrounds, that we quite often see technology and science and engineering as the future and how we're going to solve the climate crisis, whereas arts, humanities, and social sciences have a huge part to play. And this project in particular, students form teams to problem solve real-world sustainability challenges set by their university. It adopted a living labs approach with students' own universities and their local communities serving as the testbed for their ideas. And it had a strong focus on environmental, societal, and economic impacts of the projects. And many of the projects that were completed align themselves with the goals, and the goals provide a really useful framework for identifying the breadth of sustainability to these students. And actually, Eric touched on storytelling as being a really important aspect, and one of the projects identified storytelling as key to engaging students in sustainable development. So I think that's really, it was really clear through this project as well. Next up is one of our campaigns in Sos UK, Invest for Change. So it's a campaign which aims to radically reform how universities invest their money, creating a more resilient and sustainable economy through investments. So it builds on the Divest movement, which was campaigning for universities to divest from fossil fuel industry and investments and pensions. And the aim is for university money to act in the interest of students and the world they'll graduate into rather than against it. And it supports students to run campaigns on campus, as well as working directly with universities and investment managers, with the aim to finance solutions to environmental and social challenges such as renewable energy or social housing projects. So campaigns like this, system change campaigns, are going to be important if we want to achieve the goals. And my last case study is from the SDG teaching that I spoke about earlier that has just finished. And it's an example from Press Academy, their higher Spanish class. And so this is learners aged 16 to 18. And it's enabling students to make connections with different people and their culture and play a fuller part of global citizens through their Spanish course. So they watched a documentary about the Barefoot Foundation in Colombia, which focuses on education, inequalities, and food production and distribution. And the students were tasked with producing a short essay or presentation in Spanish to talk about the work of the Barefoot Foundation and links with the SDGs, as well as reflecting on whether the issues faced by children in Colombia are similar to those faced by young people in Scotland. And the teacher said that this project is an example of how we can use the SDGs as a viable context for language learning and developing cultural awareness. And it allows students to link their learning to global concerns and develop competencies in self-awareness and collaboration. And I thought this was just a great example. And interesting, my first exposure to sustainability was through language courses where we learned about environmental issues in the context of learning a new language. So this one really spoke to me. So, as we saw from the research earlier, with the knowledge that such a high proportion of students are concerned about climate change, we need to avoid them facing overwhelming levels of eco-anxiety, which we are seeing increasing levels of, particularly in young people. So we can use education as a tool to support them in becoming agents of change towards Agenda 2030. And again, that builds on something you said, Eric, around the kind of enormity of the problem. And this eco-anxiety is becoming more and more prevalent, and we're seeing it more and more. So we need to create this opportunity for students to become agents of change. We need to be addressing sustainability in terms of the formal, informal, and subliminal curriculum within our learning spaces, inclusive of research, funding, and sponsorship of institutions. So through this holistic approach, we can communicate the SDGs and sustainability in an effective way and contribute effectively towards Agenda 2030 in our education system. And education for the SDGs will need to ensure learners don't just learn about sustainability, but learn for sustainability. And it's not just what you learn, but how you learn it as well, to ensure students can develop the knowledge and understanding, the skills and attributes to be able to tackle the greatest challenges of our time and ensure a better future for all. And what's really important, especially when we talk about communication, that it's not just about awareness of the situation. We don't just need to raise awareness, but also the skills and competencies to address it. Otherwise, we run the risk of overwhelming students with concerns about the climate crisis, social injustice, which can just lead to more eco-anxiety and inaction and inability to act. And I just wanted to share this. I won't go through each one, but these are the SOS UK skills that we'd like to see students develop when experiencing pathways for development. And again, this isn't just about communicating what situation we're in, but the skills needed to address the situation. Things like using resources efficiently, looking at global problems from the perspective of people around the world, considering ethical issues, the causes of inequality, how to create change, and you know, all these skills here, and I'll leave them out so you can take a closer look, but we think that these are what all students from every discipline, our future doctors, our future lawyers, our future politicians, our future artists should be leaving education with the skills to tackle sustainable development. So a couple more examples. I really wanted to share how we support students to lead on sustainability campaigns that contribute towards sustainable development, because we recognize the values of student leadership. Young people have a vested interest in the future of our planet and society because they are the ones who will feel the impacts of the climate breakdown, despite having contributed so little to its causes. So from an education perspective also, by bringing students in to co-create the strategies for education sustainability, their entire education experience becomes more meaningful. And students are both the product and the consumer of an education system, so their voices should be heard. So one example I have here is Teach the Future, which is a pupil-led campaign lobbying to address the current problems with our formal education provision. And the campaign asks for the English campaign, for a government commissioned review into how the whole of English formal education system is preparing students for the climate emergency and ecological crisis. The inclusion of the climate emergency and ecological crisis in teacher training and a new professional teaching qualification, and the Climate Emergency Education Act for England. And you know, we've also seen through this that school teachers, 75% say they have not had adequate training to educate students on climate change. And how can we look to solve these issues when our teachers aren't adequately prepared to teach the generations of tomorrow? And that's what this campaign is really aiming to achieve. Another campaign that we support is Mock COP, which was an online conference in November looking to fill the void of the postponed COP26. And it was youth-led, youth-run. There were 18 part-time youth staff across 12 countries, supported by SOS UK. And it achieved 330 delegates aged 11 to 30 from 140 countries coming together, and 72% were from the global south. And it resulted in a unified global statement from the youth of the world to global leaders, with policy asks on climate justice, climate education, climate resilient livelihoods, physical and mental health, and NDCs. And I put the link there, mockcop.org/treaty. I'd really encourage you to read the treaty, because it's incredibly powerful what these young people have come up with, and I really hope the world takes notice. It reached 100 million people through broadcast interviews in over 40 countries, driving ambition for COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. So the youth are now working to get countries to adopt part or all of the treaty, which is really exciting. And it's clear through campaigns like Teach the Future and Mock COP that when we bring students and young people into the decision-making process, they show us what real ambitious and equitable action looks like. And I think we should be ready to listen if we want to achieve Agenda 2030 to young people, to students, to Indigenous communities and the people facing the climate crisis right now. And I think it's really important to bring them into the decision-making and to listen. So my key takeaways are that students want this, and I think a lot of people are joining from an education setting, and that students want this, and as the consumers and of our education system, I think we should be paying attention to that demand. That the SDGs are applicable to all disciplines and all stages of education. There's no subject that can say this isn't relevant to my teaching. And right from primary schools to postdoctoral education, it should be embedded across all disciplines and all stages. And learning for the SDGs should be applied, relevant, and to equip students with the skills, knowledge, and attributes to contribute to and thrive in a sustainable society. And lastly, bringing students and young people into the decision making is essential to achieving Agenda 2030. So I have some resources here and that we can share afterwards, I assume, with the attendees as well. So some links to the things I spoke about to our research and to the mock COP and Teach the Future websites. Yeah, I think that's everything from me, but I'm really excited to discuss more and any questions that have come up throughout my presentation. And my details are on the screen as well. I'm very happy if anyone would like to get in touch. If SOS UK can support your work in any way, we're always keen to work with universities and students.
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation and your fresh ideas. I really enjoyed the focus you put on how students themselves can be agents for change. Thank you. We will start now with a debate and open discussion, question and answers. We have some messages here on the chat. I'll start with one for Rachel. They say, Rachel, great initiatives. Has your institution tried to share this project to other students' organizations outside the UK? Do you have some guidelines, materials to facilitate dissemination?
Yes, so through SOS International, our kind of international network, we share our initiatives and programs through that network. So I would definitely encourage anyone in a group to look at SOS International. We can definitely support dissemination activities. I don't have any guidance. We have lots of reports that can easily be shared, so they're all on our website, and I can share a more specific link to where our research reports are found. But if there's kind of specific dissemination activities that we can support, then I'd be very happy to discuss with individuals. But I think, yeah, through international work, it's through our SOS International network. And we have had good results outside of the UK. We've run EU projects across Europe on things like fuel poverty and student energy within student accommodation. We run behaviour change for staff across Europe. And we also have that running in Australia and New Zealand. So we have definitely worked outside of the UK, but our biggest remit as a UK-based charity is in the UK.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. We have another question. Maybe this one would be for both of you. Josep Calvo, he says, could you go further in your comment on communicating uncertainty? Why is it so difficult to explain the uncertainty should not be an excuse for inaction? Any ideas?
Say that. Did I say that? Or was that Eric?
No, I think that was Eric. Yeah.
That could be me. I'll answer this one. No, I personally fully agree that the uncertainty should not be a reason why we don't take actions for sustainable development. What I more meant is that because it's so uncertain, it's hard to convince those who can take the political decisions for sustainable development to act on those, because of the uncertainty. It's what if something goes horribly wrong for the political party who's making this decision, and then they don't get reelected, because that's what elected officials want. They want to get reelected and continue the cycle of them being in power, their party being in power. And so when you're faced with an uncertain situation, they'd rather tend towards business as usual in their approaches to sustainable development. And I think it is the importance of these, positive case examples where there are countries who are doing something to address sustainable development and saying, no, it does actually work and it can be scaled, or certain aspects can be adopted from this country and implemented in that country. Yeah, so it's definitely not an excuse not to take actions. Uncertainty, everything is uncertain. Me stepping outside of my door could be uncertain whether I will be hit by a bus. It's something that we all have to live with on a daily basis. And sustainable development is no different than that. So sometimes it just takes a lot of courage to make those first steps and try something and trying being innovative. Yeah.
And I suppose to add to that, there's also the uncertainty around the complexity. And when we talk with students, particularly around behavior change and individual action, there's so many trade-offs and external factors that make this a really complex area. And so students saying that, oh, I'm not using a plastic bag anymore, I'm using a pave bag, and kind of not understanding all the different factors that go into what makes a bag. And this kind of, it's a really challenging area, and not everyone is a climate scientist or an environmental economist. And so the uncertainty can be incredibly overwhelming when it's like, what decision do I make? So I think that's one that we still haven't cracked, because no one has all the answers. It's an ongoing challenge, understanding the right course of action, because what is the right course of action?
Yeah. Here another message that's from Joran Veldengrun. Universities communicate already their engagement, for instance, on environmental issues, gender equality, well-being, quality education. Do you advise them to communicate separately about SDGs? In a, for example, dedicated section on the website or in a SDG report? Or would you rather include the SDG discourse into their other contexts?
So from my perspective, I think, well, why not both? I think it's important to look at the SDGs and to understand outwardly the progress being made on the SDGs specifically and in one place, so to kind of see it in one place, but also it should be built into absolutely everything that an institution does, and it should be part of the formal learning. It should be part of students' modules, and not just one lesson on the SDGs, but through every decision that is made should be part of it, as well as things like the campus. And does the campus have the accessible buildings, and does it have recycling bins, and does it have walking paths, and like as to the campus based as well, building in the aims of the SDGs, as well as the culture of a university, and that kind of learning through osmosis of just, this is what we do and this is part of who we are. So I think it is important to report on the SDGs, to communicate on the SDGs specifically, but I do think it needs to be embedded across the whole institution as well. And that's from top down, middle out, and bottom up. So students leading it, senior leadership teams leading it, as well as individual teaching staff, professional staff.
Yeah, another message. This one comes from Elena Sule. She says, I sometimes found it challenging to impose sustainability values to those countries where fast consumption was imposed and have no resources to implement such sustainability. Any ideas or thoughts on how to manage these two speeds or views on sustainable development from the communication point of view? Very interesting.
I think maybe I can take a try at this, answering this question. Yeah, I think it's difficult to address these topics when people don't have any other choice but to consume in a certain way. A lot about sustainable development is, do people even have the choice to consume sustainably? We can not use a plastic bag, or use paper, or make a reusable bag or something like that. But if those processes are not part of the culture or anything like that, then you don't allow people to have this chance to even be sustainable. And for the fast consumption economy, I think the global north is probably the most guilty in this aspect of the fast consumption culture, because we really do take and consume and throw away and then buy something new. So I think a lot of it is just being able to offer people different choices and the opportunity to act in a sustainable manner and make it a viable option. Don't make it super expensive that only very few people can afford it, and to be able to make this decision. So making it widely accessible is key here.
And I suppose I'd like to add around imposing sustainability values. I think it's really important not to impose kind of, global north ways of doing things and kind of colonialist views of doing things across the world, and listening and working with and empowering leaders within countries to develop their own sustainability solutions, and sharing knowledge and sharing technologies and things like that, but not dictating how countries should or shouldn't sustainably develop, but really making that collaborative process, listening to communities, indigenous leaders across the world, rather than it being a one-size-fits-all approach, because it's not. The history of the degradation of our planet is not equal across the world. So I think it's taking that approach of really tailoring it to each country and each community is incredibly important, and listening to voices from across the world.
Yeah, I think I also agree with that 100%, that it's we even see that within Europe, that there are every country, even regions within countries, have their own specific context for how they do things, how they handle things. That is no different with sustainable development. And local contexts need to be understood. They need to be listened to. So the people who are living at the local level, who are experiencing these things every day, most likely have the best knowledge on how to address these issues. And it isn't about the global north saying, oh, you should do this, or you should behave in this way, you're not being sustainable. It's not necessarily we're not in that position to really be able to do that, and that we can even learn something from the way others do it from all parts of the world, and how they address sustainable development. And so it's really about this equal footing and listening and learning from one another. That's extremely important in communication about the SDGs. Yeah.
Thank you both. There is another message that one was written at the beginning of the presentation of Eric. Thank you, Eric, for this great presentation. Does Esdn organize workshops on communication and SDGs? How different should campaigns for citizens in relation to campaigns for the business sector, policymakers, or other sectors be? Or does the same approach apply? Thank you.
No, that's a very good question. Does the Esdn organize workshops on communication in the SDGs specifically? Not necessarily. This was just a one-time workshop that we ended up organizing that was specifically centered around the SDGs and how to communicate about them. But indirectly, we're always communicating about the SDGs in all of our conferences and workshops, because all themes are important to sustainable development. So being able to communicate the different ideas that are happening, the different best practice examples from countries is what we do, and to foster this learning. So inadvertently, yes, we're always communicating the SDGs, but about the specific topic, not always. Let me read the other parts of the questions. I think it was more about tailoring for the different stakeholder groups. Yes, I think each specific group definitely needs its own specially tailored kind of communication approach because they all have different needs. They have from sustainable development, policymakers are going to have different needs or goals than the business sector or NGOs. So knowing and understanding what those needs are, or what their wishes are, what their objectives are, what they want to get from sustainable development will help you better be able to reach them with whatever message you want to send to them or convey to them, that we would like you to behave in this way. So maybe to a business, they would understand that as, oh, if you don't adhere to these standards, if you don't rethink your supply chains, for example, or make sure that there aren't any human rights abuses going on, then we won't buy from you. They understand that language. You know, you don't need to use that kind of communication with a policymaker because they don't have to do really much with anything with supply chains. And so there it might be more, or a politician, please take up this climate proposal, or vote for this climate proposal, or you won't get my vote the next time you have an election or something like that. So the ways that we communicate to get attention are completely different for who we're talking to. And I think some ground things could be the same between all of them. So the ways that we kind of communicate, like telling a good story, can definitely be applicable to all stakeholder groups. But I think really understanding who you're talking to is probably one of the more important parts of that.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of more messages. This one is a little bit tricky. Do you think that may be better to allow governments against SDGs to rule for a while so that the next would be more daring? Let's say Trump or Biden, for example.
I laugh because I'm American, so this hits a little bit close to home, so maybe I can answer this. I think, I understand by saying we should let them rule to see maybe how things shouldn't be done, to see what then maybe needs to be done, to kind of put that in really, really big in stark contrast to one another. However, I think that's also probably not the best solution that we could wish for. Because during these times, it's not just Trump or even in the UK, there's also this kind of right-wing populist surge. We also saw that here in Austria, in other parts of Europe too, that it can threaten the sustainable development debate, because these topics are then never discussed, and if they're brought up, then they're attacked. And I think that's just really dangerous, especially at a time when we really need to be going ahead with the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, because we only have 9 years left to implement them and to reach all the goals that are listed underneath them. And so any kind of delay in policy and in action is time that we can really ill afford to lose. So I would say that no, it's probably not really good to kind of let them have the run of the house for 4 or 5 years, because that's a third of the time that we have to implement the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And we really need to already be making significant improvements if we want to stop climate change and the earth warming more than 1.5 degrees by like the end of the century. So yeah, actions need to already be happening and not being delayed.
And yeah, I would 100% agree that it is Agenda 2030 and it is March 2021 already. So I think there is an urgency. We are in a climate emergency, especially, but also from the kind of more society goals. People are dying, and people are like under these regimes and under these policies, and it's directly impacting people's lives today. And I think that isn't for the sake of kind of sending a message. I would disagree that it's okay to let these things happen to make a point. I think we're beyond that now. The situation is so pressing that I don't think there is time to act. And maybe in the 70s and 80s, those messages will have helped us get to where we should be today, but I guess they didn't.
Yeah. Well, and here the last message. Maybe it's a little bit more generic and open. Thanks for these great presentations. I would like to ask about impact. How and if you measure the impact of the communication campaigns, and what is the role of social media and impact?
I can speak first on this one. So we have a very big focus on data research and impact, and we follow up every campaign, every initiative with quite a lot of research into that. And it's hugely important to assess what we're doing. One of our biggest areas is student skills. And so after, for example, the teaching that I mentioned, where educators embed the SDGs into their teaching and learning, we ask them to share a survey with their students. And in that survey, we would ask the respondents, the students who experience learning for the SDGs, if they have developed new skills, if they have learned more about the SDGs, and things like that. So we find surveys are incredibly important. For example, for the teaching, 86% of the student respondents identified skills or attributes that their learning experience during the teaching helped them to develop, such as communication, critical thinking, emotional intelligence. So we survey everything that we do. Surveys are boring, but they are important. So we do focus on surveys. In terms of the, and also, sorry, I should say, we a lot of long-term tracking, I'll share the link to some reports in the chat in a minute, but we track this over long periods of time. So we collect data on students over like the last decade we've been doing it, so we can see those opinions change and shift, and they're all shifting in the students are getting more concerned, students want more, so we need to be doing this. In terms of social media, it does vary massively. We do utilize social media, but I wouldn't say it's our greatest tool, but we are kind of a national facilitator of these discussions, a national campaigning organization, and individual universities will use social media to different extents. I think it does have a huge part to play, especially with young people, but there are many other areas that are equally important, and I think, and our work obviously within education through their institutions and through their learning spaces and learning experiences is probably more where we focus our efforts. But I don't know, Eric, if you have some different opinions on social media, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, I think we also don't use social media within the ESDN so heavily, but I do see that it is a very, very important medium, especially as you mentioned, Rachel, for reaching the young people, because they're more on social media nowadays than before. So we use Twitter, for example. But I think that the problem with social media is that there are so many platforms now and so many ways, and that it's really, really difficult to become masters of just one platform, let alone a few that people are reaching, to really being able to broaden your horizons and outreach and the people that you end up influencing. But yeah, it definitely has a place because you're able to communicate extremely quickly and really key core messages. I think Twitter only allows 280 characters, if I'm not mistaken. So you're kind of forced to reformulate your message that you want to get across. So if you take a really complex report and you only get 280 characters to formulate it, then it has to pack a lot of meaning into that. And that's also a way that you can have more people engage with it than having to read this, 20, 30-page report. And if they're then interested, then it can kind of trigger further conversations. It can trigger then the search for more information on that specific topic, which is also extremely useful when it comes to sustainable development, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for the debate and this open conversation. And now we will start with a speech by Professor Daniela Tilbury. She's an internationally recognized for her expertise in leadership and institutional change for sustainable development. Daniela has received several research awards, including the Macquarie Innovation Award for Research and the Marie Curie International Research Fellowship. Professor Tilbury is now the Commissioner for Sustainable Development of the Government of Gibraltar, and she will be future honoris causa at University of Girona. Thank you very much, Professor Tilbury, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Buona tarde, buenos días. Delighted to be here. And firstly, let me just commence by saying thank you to the organizers for enabling me to be part of this fantastic series of seminars. Thank you specifically to the University of Girona and to Alicia, who's been very patient with me. I am exceptionally pleased to be formally associated with the University of Girona, who do some very innovative work with regards to not just research and engagement, but also in terms of a deep commitment to sustainability. Equally with Guni, who has been a partner and an inspirator for me for the last over a decade. So pleased, very, very pleased to see this partnership between Guni and Girona. Thank you for this very brief session where I want to start by thanking the inspirational speakers today, Eric, Rachel, Sylvia, the fantastic contributions, each of you contributing something very different, but with very similar messages. And my role is to try and extract some of those core messages today and to also link them to the speakers from Monday and Wednesday's session. And I think there are a lot of commonalities. There's some big themes underpinning the specific experiences and case studies that you're all sharing. So for the next 7 to 10 minutes, I very much would like to try and extract some of those and draw some attention to what I think are some underlying themes. So the first one, I'm hoping you'll be able to see this on your screens. It says, you can better engage with us down here. And this is how Sylvia started today. She was saying, we need to talk, we need to think about how we engage with our communities, how we build that trust again, how we redefine that relationship between the researcher and the researched, or those who use the research. You know, that requires a paradigm shift. And Norbert on Wednesday was also talking about this important shift when he was speaking about the policy changes, the citizen science engagement, but redefines how knowledge is created. He spoke about co-creation, and he spoke about not just a top-down approach of sharing the information that has been created or generated by the universities, but actually working on the ground level to bring in those people who will be using that research, who will be needing that data, who need those recommendations to take their work forward, to formulate, to structure, to shape the way that the research is done. So they don't just come in at the end. And this is what the SDGs are all about. The SDGs are requiring us to rethink the way we do education, research, communication, citizen science. And this is about a very concrete example that both Sylvia and Norbert today were helping us redefine. Next slide, please. Another key theme that Eric highlighted, but also came through the SOS presentation too, that Rachel put across, was this idea of hope versus fear. Now, there's a very important document that was put out by WWF called Weathercocks and Signposts. This was a very seminal document that came out as a piece of research that was done almost a decade ago that signaled how the environmental movement had got it wrong in terms of creating changes in our society. It's the urgency was not there, the way that people engage was not there. Now, I want to really highlight this. Eric spoke about the need to avoid doom and gloom scenarios, That was also echoed by Mario on Monday when he spoke about education for sustainable development shifting away from presenting facts and figures, from presenting data that can be very disempowering. We need to turn this around. The SDGs are not just about saying we need to understand the way the world is now. The SDGs are also about saying we need to start creating an alternative future. We need to look forward. We need to change the way that we engage with the future and not just look at it in terms of fear, in terms of disempowerment, but to create opportunities for people to take control. I like to use the word claim back the future, because the future has been slipping away from us. And we need to create opportunities in the university and through the university in the community for our stakeholders to start reclaiming that future. And SOS in the UK, as Rachel explained, has already started to do that. The students are asking, they're demanding that the universities change the way in which the future is presented, that predict the future and create opportunities for students to be able to predetermine, to change, to shape that future that's coming across. So again, I think this has been echoed not just today, but throughout the presentations this week. Next slide, please. I expect you all to be independent, innovative, critical thinkers who will do exactly as I say. This has been a theme on the 3 days. It is not just what of sustainable development. It's not just the what, it's not just the information, it's not just the content, it's how. It's the how of sustainable development that needs challenging. And the how of sustainable development in universities particularly is about pedagogy. It's about relationships between the staff, the teachers, the researchers, and the students and the stakeholders. We cannot have this situation anymore where we are passing down that information. We have to co-create, we have to consider not just opportunities of content, but also platforms for participation. We need to do that. And we need to think about how education, communication changes that message. A lot of the advocacy, a lot of the communication has been very predetermined. It has been very disempowering. It's like the way we do our theses for research at the moment, how our students do PhD or undergraduate theses. They do this work, they get supervised and guided, but at the end, they generate a document that sits in the library or that sits in a shelf. That's outdated. We have to redo those theses. We have to rethink about how we assess, about how we encourage our students to generate knowledge that is worthwhile and applicable, and in ways that is co-created and supported by those who can implement that knowledge. You can take that knowledge and use it, and we should judge it by its applicability and not just by its ability to sit on a shelf. Next slide. So I really want to draw attention to the SOS work, because I think this Teach the Future is critical. We spend so much time problem solving and looking down at our existing problems, we forget to look up and down and across. So we are very much focused on the short term. We're focused on resolving. Our research is very much centered around let's problem solve. Our teaching case studies are, here's an example, please let's try and problem solve our way out. That is not enough. We need to create those opportunities to create that alternative future, to think about the future, to reclaim. And Rachel spoke about decolonizing our future. I think that's really quite critical. We have inherited a way of thinking. We have inherited a way of doing things that is so embedded in our consciousness that we don't even question it. But actually, if we start thinking about the future that we want, and that's why I liked Eric's video particularly, where, you know, from Iceland, because it takes us there, and then we work backwards from there, and we start questioning what it is that we're doing today that is taking us in a different direction. So we need to reclaim our future, we need to decolonize our thinking and create those opportunities for us to take that future forward. And I want to give you an example. Here, you know, Earth Hour, you must have heard of Earth Hour. That's coming next Saturday, the 27th. This is where the planet goes and switches off their lights. I had the pleasure of being in the committee in the board that actually came up with the idea in Sydney. I was a member of WWF Australia that came up with the idea of Earth Hour. And it has, you know, grown tremendously. Very different to standing by the Sydney Harbour Bridge in 2007, not knowing if this campaign was going to work. And I remember us looking up to see if the Sydney Harbour Bridge lights were going to go off, if the city lights were going to go off. You know, it was a huge gamble for us. And now, so many years later, we see this as one of the largest environmental movements. But what we have learned through that is that switching off lights is great, but there's not enough. We need to look at creating futures and seeing the future in a new light. So for example, this year, I'm working with WWF to ask people to create their futures on a video clip, no more than 60 seconds, and to say, this is how I want my future to be. This is how I'd like my town, my profession, my office to look in 2030. And to generate that futures thinking that's so critical, so that that switching off of lights is not just a one-day thing, that it actually links straight across to that bigger picture in the future. So thank you to both of you today for reminding us about the importance about thinking ahead and long term. Next slide, please. Need to say that our universities and our schools are not teaching us on how to think about the future positively yet. So although the word futures thinking is banged about a lot and we're using it, and visioning was something that we spoke of in Education for Sustainability in 1990, we spoke of that being a very critical dimension of education for sustainable development. But the truth is, we don't know how to do it yet. Our universities and our colleges, our tutors, our teachers, our facilitators have not had enough experience of understanding how to facilitate this particular process, which requires us to deconstruct as well as to construct an alternative vision. Next slide, please. This is something that was raised by Eva on the Monday. And I think this is a very important aspect. There are some undercurrents in some of the presentations today about the need to reform. And although this cartoon is very polar in that it looks at pointing fingers as who needs to reform, and I don't quite like that, I think the message is very much about the fact the SDGs are not add-ons. They're not just themes we bring into the curriculum. They're not just things that we bring into our everyday work. The SDGs are disruptive. They are seeking reform. They are seeking us to reconstruct the way we do things, the way we live, the way we work, the way we educate. It is asking us to be quite radical, really. But radical with a small r, because if we don't change the way we live and the way we work, our doom and gloom futures are likely to continue to exist. And if we want a more positive future, we need to make those radical changes. Next one, please. So I'm trying to sort of summarize here some of the shifts that we're needing to make, you know, away from teaching specific attitudes and values to encouraging values clarification. And Rachel pointed this out in the question and answer session today, as did Eva on Monday. The need to stop seeing people as the problem, you know, those behavior change strategies, that the Weathercocks and Signpost document, that research, that seminal research that says, if you see people as the problem, then you're sending messages to them about simplistic changes in lifestyles that are not big enough or urgent enough to make that radical move towards sustainability. We have to engage and see people as agents who can facilitate and make a difference. Talk about the positive things they can do, not about the negative impacts of their current work. And we're needing to change learning from single actions to learning to for change. And I'm engaged currently in this very important work, very difficult work, but very important work called Future Makers, Futures Forward for Future Makers. This is where we get young people between the ages of 20 and 30 who have some brilliant ideas, who want to change the world, and they have great clarity in their visions and great energy, but don't know how to bring about change. There is an art, there is a learning, there is a process of change that has to be taught, that has to be experienced. And so creating those opportunities through our education system so that our students know how to bring about change, not just what change to bring about and why, but how to bring about change is quite critical. And finally, we need to focus more on structure and changes that are going to be long lasting, rather than pilot projects and individual changes that require a lot of energy continually. And we need to really start looking at innovation. We need to create opportunities for co-creation, for reflection, for participation, as I said earlier. So I'm conscious that it's almost 1 o'clock. I just want to say thank you to everybody who listened for the last 10 minutes. And thank you very much to all those who participated this week with some phenomenal ideas. Some really fantastic ideas, and share this last visual with you about the importance of student empowerment, stakeholder empowerment, learning empowerment, and a whole range of different ways in which we can bring that change together, but not really discuss the detail, because I think the detail has been there in your presentations. Whether we are looking at decolonizing, whether we're looking at transforming, whether we're looking at crossing boundaries, which was a core message on Monday, whether we're looking at social learning and questioning, thank you, because I think we're taking those steps closer to a more sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tilbury. I'm sure that all these ideas will remain and hopefully will pave the way in our jobs and our future and in our life. Well, and now I want to thank everybody for attending the event. It's been a fruitful session. Next session will be next week on March the 22nd at the same time, and it will cover the topic of inequality and health, innovation facing challenges in the context of COVID-19. Thank you very much for your attendance, and see you next week, and have a nice weekend.
Everyone, thank you.